First thing I want to say is that Season 5 of the Magnus Archives is leagues better than some other horror media out there. The entire body of work that is the Magnus Archives series is so well crafted, so meticulously planned out. You can see how passionate the people who worked on the show are about their show. And their work has paid off in leaps and bounds. The fan reception of the show has been overwhelmingly positive. The sequel series, The Magnus Protocol, is being waited for by everyone with bated breath. And there's now a TTRPG system that I'm really excited to play because I also contributed to the Kickstarter, and I'm really, really excited to scare my friends. This series, I cannot overstate how impactful this series has been. The Magnus Archives as a show has been able to contribute so much in terms of the horror genre itself, and I have no doubt that we will continue to see its influences in coming years by horror writers such as myself that keep using these themes, motifs, and concepts to keep writing horror stories. All that being said, Season 5 is my least favorite. Hi, my name is David. I'm making YouTube videos talking about things that I like to talk about, analyzing. Writing is what I plan to do more than anything. Right now I'm focusing on the writing of the Magnus Archives series, written by John Sims, directed by Alexander J. Newell, produced by Rusty Quill. I've made multiple videos about this show before. Go check out my kill count series. I had a lot of fun with that. This video right now is a continuation of all that for me. It's hard to articulate why I don't like Season 5 that much. And, you know, this is why I'm making this video, to be able to quantify my issues with the season, get to the root cause of it, to be able to talk it out, to explain it. And it's not bad. Like, I will reiterate throughout this video that this season is not bad by any means. However, I have issues with it in terms of, like, tone and setting, and it's not badly made at all. This is my critique of it, in a way, I guess. As someone who consumes and loves the show, I just want to talk about it and see if people agree with me, or even if you disagree. It's fine if you disagree. Please let me know why you enjoy the season, because I didn't as much as the other seasons. And so we're just going to talk about it. We're going to get into it. Most of what I learn about critiquing stories is looking at the meta context of it, of how, when it was created, who wrote it, stuff like that. And so to begin, I will have to be talking about Season 5 aired during the coronavirus pandemic. In fact, Season 4, my favorite season, I already made a video about it, so go check it out, aired its finale on Halloween of 2019. Season 4 ended with a large shakeup of the status quo. The worst thing has happened, and the apocalypse is upon us. The fandom has dubbed it the Eye-apocalypse because it was mainly controlled by the eye beholding that watches as other people are being afraid from the other fears. Eye-apocalypse. I'm also gonna call it the change, because I believe that's what in show series in the Magnus Archives is what they call the apocalypse, without calling it the apocalypse, the change. The blip, it's not the blip. But I will be using those terms interchangeably. Either way, the apocalypse is here. So now, Johnny and whoever is helping him write, I assume he might be writing it by himself. I haven't heard anything about that, but I know that sometimes he, you know, as a writer and working in a context like that, you might get some inspiration, help, whatever, from the director, Alexander J. Newell, or anyone else that might be around his life or stuff like that, whatever. The writers, I'm going to say writers as a general, must look how to resolve this change of the status quo in one season, consisting in 40 episodes. Season 5 of the Magnus Archives was, quote, conceived, written, and entered production before the UK lockdowns and the entirety of the pandemic started in early 2020, as stated in the announcements prior to the episode in 161 Dwelling. You know, the announcements right before the episode actually starts that Season 5 had a lot to live up to, considering the increasing popularity of its prior seasons, and as many writers will tell you, sticking the landing is hard. I mean, it's a common joke that Stephen King doesn't know how to write endings, but yeah, making sure that a story ends successfully and in a satisfying way, and in a way that satisfies the story, as well as satisfying the consumers, as well as I don't know. There's many different reasons why an ending is really hard to nail down. Not only does Rusty Quill have to meet fan expectations, they must also elevate their work. They have to deal with all that sort of concern and stress that comes with making an ending, while also dealing with the production constraints of the pandemic as they move forward. In the CEO announcements that aired on March 25th, 2020, that's 2 days after the UK lockdowns began, Alexandra J. Newell told us about the different safety precautions they're taking for recording during the pandemic, such as making a task force for their employee health, remote recording sessions, and closing the recording studio itself. And as the show was airing, there would be multiple updates to behind-the-scenes production updates in terms of what is happening going forward and what are we going to do, etc., etc. And I'll get into those. But all throughout the show, throughout the 5 seasons, Rusty Quill has been very transparent of where they started filming in and their upgrades as the show got more popular and the funding started to be able to support them. I remember in a Q&A, I don't remember which one, but I listened to a Q&A that Johnny and Alexander did, talking about the beginning of how they started filming and stuff like that, and their lack of resources, or at least lack of a proper studio. And I remember them talking about how they had to record the voice actress for Sasha, her scream at the end of season 1 when she gets taken by not Sasha. They had to put her between 2 mattresses to be able to muffle her screams so that people in the vicinity wouldn't be able to hear them and alert the police. So that's definitely starting from the very bottom. Now, after all so many years and so much support on the Patreon and stuff like that, they have a studio now. They had to close it down because of the pandemic. They've always been telling us how it all started. And the pandemic threw a large obstacle in front of all of them. Anyone can tell you that living and supporting yourself during that hard time was a difficult attempt. Some people succeeded, some people failed. And so I have to also consider how that affects the quality of the show. And not just, oh, this thing is bad, point blank. Maybe this thing is bad, or I don't like this thing as much because of the constraints they had to do during the show. I know there were moments where it feels like Basira is in just a slightly different location because of the audio quality, because I know that she had to be recorded elsewhere or something like that. I have to look at my critique with knowing that they also had to deal with the pandemic as well. On April 2nd, 2020, merely a week after the UK lockdowns, episode 161, Dwelling, aired, and the story began. There was a focused storyline, which we hadn't really gotten since season 3, which was to end the apocalypse. A focused storyline helps the entire season feel like it's on track towards something, which was somewhat missing from season 1, 2, and 4. They knew where they were heading towards, and that's always a recipe for success. So where does it go off for me? The season doesn't feel like a true season of the Magnus Archives to me. And there are 3 main reasons, and none of these reasons are bad things that they did that are bad. These are things that I've seen that I'm this feels different. Some of them are obvious, some of them are required, we'll get into it. First is what I mentioned prior, the shake-up of the status quo. Many stories have a challenging of the status quo, the existing state of affairs, that the disruption of causes the story to begin. Lion King, Black Panther, Bridesmaids, the story begins, continues, and ends when the status quo has been affected. Hyenas take over Pride Rock. Killmonger takes over Wakanda. Kristen Wiig's best friend is getting married, and now she has to take responsibilities for herself. The characters seek to return to the status quo, and the characters succeed or fail in doing so, ultimately ending in the status quo restored, say the Lions restoring into power on Pride Rock, or in really good stories, the status quo slightly altered, slightly better. T'Challa opens up international relations with Wakanda and the world, and Kristen Wiig gets with Chris O'Dowd. The Magnus Archives already had a small shakeup in Season 4 with the introduction of the Extinction. I think that's what I was trying to say when I was doing that video of like, rising stakes or power creep or whatever. It's the introduction of the Extinction is a change of the status quo, honestly. Because we had so much things about all other 14 fears. Suddenly there's a 15 fear, and we're that. I already talked a lot about the Extinction, what it meant to me, and what it did to the story. But, however, the change that occurs after Season 4, the apocalypse, of course, changes the status quo, and John and Martin seek to rectify it. In doing so, they return the world as it is, and also fundamentally change it, releasing the fears onto other worlds. However, the former examples I gave, and many other status quos, are changes that keep the world itself consistent in a way. Like, they're not vast changing things that, like, alter the tone or setting. The apocalypse is a very dramatic status quo change. Of course, it's the apocalypse. And the world feels so different. The story feels so different for me. That's not a bad thing. It's just something to note, at least, that coming into Season 5, status quo completely gone. The status quo of all the 4 seasons prior, it just it unbalances me as I'm listening to this show. The second reason this season feels off to me is the 3 parts of it. In 176 Blood Ties, Alexander J. Newell tells us in the announcements prior to the episode that because of the constraints of recording and pandemic complications, Season 5 will have to be split into 3 acts with a hiatus between each one to make sure that they do the best job possible. To be able to release the pressure on the people who are working on this, make sure that there's always the best sort of thing with their story. The first act aired from April 22nd, 2020 to July 16th, 2020, encompassing episodes 161 Dwelling to 176 Blood Ties, most of which was experiencing the different fear domains of the post-change world, as well as heading towards Basira and Daisy. The second act aired from September 3rd, 2020 to November 26th, 2020, encompassing episodes 177 Wonderland to 189 Piers, most of which was dealing with Daisy, Helen Distortion, and ending with Finding Melanie and Georgie. The third act aired from January 14th, 2021 to March 25th, 2021, encompassing episodes 190 Scavengers to 200 Last Words, which of course deal with Annabelle Cain's web plan and ending the apocalypse. Huzzah! Having a structure like this is a smart idea, especially for having space between acts for production breaks with the constraint of the pandemic. No other season had acts like this explicitly spelled out, which does make this season feel a little off. The third reason that this season feels off for me also ties into the 3-act structure that doesn't appear in the other 4 seasons. This story has a really, really tight storyline. No other season has such a tight storyline as well, besides probably Season 3. And you could say Season 3 is separated in, like, parts or acts or whatever for every time that, like, John gets kidnapped, or when he's in London and then traveling abroad. However, these feel more, in Season 3, these feel more like delineations of the story, twists and turns as the plot moves forward, with a structure placed on top of it after it's done, much like the fear themselves. Like, I can say after Season 3 aired, oh yeah, let's separate here and here and here, based on what happened in the story, be like, oh, this is the first act, this is the second act, this is the third act, etc., etc. Could also be, when John is on the run, and then he's back in the Institute, and then he's abroad, and then like small little, I guess, fourth act would be the unknowing. Either way, the season 3 had the central storyline of stopping the unknowing, but those structures that you can place are after the fact. Season 3 was not written with the intention of these divisions, only that the plot and story continue. That's just how the story progressed. That's just how the characters moved. That's just what happened in the story. In a way, season 5 feels too structured. Because they had to maintain good pacing within the story, they choose the plot points, they choose to end the sections and allow for a hiatus. And this is very good pacing, you know? Finding Basira and then finding Jordan and Melanie are good story points and good places for a break. It also hypes up for the next moment that happens. They, for all we know, they may have followed the exact same story had there not been a pandemic. However, the structure of the storyline is very rigid in comparison to season 3's central storyline. John's research was alternated with the Institute's statements, with Martin Basira, Melanie Basira's statements. So there are a variety and peaks and valleys in what's happening. There's 2 main central storylines there. In season 1, there wasn't even a central storyline until 22 Colony, and even then, Jane Prentice and her worms were more background stuff, until it wasn't. You know, there was moments where, like, John was talking to Martin, and he was like, oh, are you still sleeping in the Institute? And people were talking about, oh, there's worms out there. That's really just background stuff that is happening, until it isn't 2 episodes before the end of the season. You know? This one background storyline. Not Sasha was in the background until Melanie pointed her out in 76 Smell of Blood. Most of season 2 was a storyline of John investigating, and even yet, it was only like in the supplementals at the end of the episodes, so that felt more like almost like a background thing, or even then, it was just one storyline with one sort of background story. Season 4 had so many storylines that weaved in and out and ended in terms of the storylines within the statements itself and stuff like that. Go check out my season 4 video. I had a lot of fun with that. Season 5 has one main storyline. One main thing that we continue to episode, and is, at points, I have to say, exhausting. John and Martin try to end the apocalypse and free all of humanity from eternal torment. Simple and easy. 40 episodes to do that. Without strong variation, tends to make one feel tired. And maybe that was intended. Maybe it's part of the horror. But for me, at least, it was too structured, and I got bored. I got tired. I needed breaks within the show, and there were like small little breaks between stuff. But the entirety of the entire storyline is just continued, go through domain, witness domain, next domain, etc., and it gets tired. It gets boring. For me, at least. With the combination of the shaken status quo, the new breakup of the show, and the strong central storyline, which has not been there for the past 4 seasons, the 5th season deviates from the norm that it has established in the beginning. I do not mean that a story cannot do that. Absolutely not. A story should be able to shift and change with what happens in the story. Stories can shift their tone and what they're trying to say if it makes sense. And this 100% makes sense with everything that we've ever talked about and everything we've ever seen. However, I do have to acknowledge within myself that because of these reasons, the season feels very separate from the first 4 and thus alienates me from it. Again, they're in their right to be able to change how the story feels and moves as the plot progresses and the characters change. This is just one of the reasons I find myself not enjoying this season as much. In many ways, this season is a culmination of all the story themes in the first 4 seasons, represented in the Hell Domains. The 14, 15 fears classification system is stretched to its limit here, and many different fears are explored, both to its detriment and to its benefit, depending on the episode. They even mention it in the show itself that Smirk's 14 is a human classification system imposed on something that is inhuman, much like actual taxonomy, much like any sort of psychology placed onto our brains. It's imperfect and does not fit in small little boxes as much as we'd like. However, in the series, they attempt to deal with this sort of thing with some episodes that don't feel wholly aligned to one fear, and then some episodes that, like, oh yeah, that's a berry right there. You know, like, some episodes can be explicitly placed upon one of the 14, 15 fears, and some are hard to pin down. At some point, to me, traversing the domain becomes a, ooh, what fear is this kind of game, instead of, oh god, what the hell is happening kind of thing. Because that's what I'm looking for. All of the episodes prior have taught us to look for these thematic and aesthetic warning signs. You know, fire, dirt, water, air, so... and now it's all flashing in front of our faces. So much things are happening in front of us, so many fears thrown at us, and it is distracting now. At least in the prior seasons, all the statements were contained in and of itself one single fear. At most two. Sometimes there were moments where, like, say Jurgen Leitner's story, where it sort of talks about, like, the entire premise. Either way, contains small snippet anthology. This still is an anthology, however, it's like bombastic, the buried, corruption, stranger, blah, all, and it's distracting. Like I said, it's just, and that's not bad at all. It's fun. It's fun to experience this sort of, like, I'll talk about it a little later, but experiencing the experimental sort of horror that is done here. But it's not so equal in its representation within the entire season. Most of the season, by my count, 28 episodes of the 40 episodes, are exploring a specific domain, with some plot elements placed before or after statements, such as Helen talking to Martin and John after going through different places, or Annabelle appearing, or Basira and John arguing, stuff like that. However, some domain episodes explore multiple people trapped in them, such as in The Trenches 163, while some domain episodes only really explore one, Francis in Strung Out. Most of it is simply a consequence of what's needed in the story. Early on, there are little story elements to fit in the episode, so there's more space for exploration of who's in this place and what's going through their minds and stuff like that. And as the season goes on, more plot points must fit into the stories, at times taking over the statements in terms of importance or even runtime. I believe, I have to check it, but I believe Accomplice, where Basira kills Daisy, the statement is very, very short, and the rest of it is Daisy and Basira's conflict, which, again, not bad. That's just what the story has. We've seen that before. In All That Remains, Elias reads out a statement by someone who's being taken over by the lonely, and then it ends, and then we have plot stuff. That's not bad. It's just a thing that has happened, and here it happens a lot. Besides the 28 episodes, there are episodes that may be world-building or full of plot elements. The world-building episodes tend to be my favorite, especially the ones that tell of stuff that happened, like, pre-change or exploring characters. Episode 61, Dwelling, and episode 62, A Cozy Cabin, explore past tapes and past moments in the Magnus Institute, along with a domain in 162, the Cozy Cabin. 167, we'll talk about 167, Curiosity, explores Gertrude's past assistants. 181, Ignorance, explores Michaelis Alesa's past. 192, An Appointment, explores Rosie Zampano's past. 193, A Stern Look, explores Elias Bouchard before being taken over by Jonah Magnus. And 196, This Old House, explores the Hilltops Road's history, exploring the past, especially with curiosity starting looking into this old house are my highlights in this story. They help advance the plot beyond small elements, before and after statements, and also world building in and of itself. Like learning about the Hilltop Road and what it meant for the fears. Oh my gosh. The history of the Institute in Curiosity is also so illuminating, and this old house haunts me every day with what it talked about. With the episodes that progress the plotline without really any statements, mostly in Act 3, with episodes 190 Scavengers, 191 What We Lose, 197 Connected, 199 Seeing It Through, and 2000 Last Words, obviously the finale. These sort of feel like filler episodes in comparison to the entirety of the season, but in reality, some of these are the most important episodes, especially once we get closer to the end. With a mixture of domain episodes, world-building episodes, and plot episodes, the season feels unbalanced and not uniform. And of course, there are plot episodes that I feel are sort of like filler in the past seasons. However, they're not as egregious to me, because it leads into something, and there's very little. Like, the only one I can think of right off the top of my head is, oh god, I forget the name of it. It is the episode right before, like 1 or 2 episodes before they go to stop the unknowing in season 3, and it's just every single person in the Institute giving like a quick statement before they leave. That I don't remember what it's called. I'll pull it up as I'm editing, whatever. Yeah. All throughout season 1 and 4, every episode covered some statement. If it didn't cover a statement, it covered an important plot moment. Jane Princess's attack in season 1. Not such as the attack in season 2 and Jurgen Leitner. The unknowing in season 3 and saving Daisy from the coffin in season 4. Either way, those episodes were few and far between, which made us, or at least me, accustomed to the statements. The domain episodes try to emulate statements, or at least their function, but in my opinion, they are separate uses altogether. Horror is in the eye of the beholder. It varies person to person. What you might find scary, I won't. What I find scary, you might not think it. Horror is subjective, and as we have seen with the vast array of horror movies, TV shows, books, podcasts, etc., people enjoy horror in different ways. So this is the most of my personal opinion. This is a thing in my video, my own thoughts and feelings. This season isn't scary. Leading up to the season, each episode in four seasons had a self-contained story with a beginning, middle, and end. Sometimes episodes, like I said, were plot episodes, finale season 2, or episode 158 Panopticon. Either way, there was a variety, and there was a story. Season 5's domain episodes are not stories. They are dreams. Few have an end to them, and few have a resolution, at least contained within the episode. An average domain episode may describe the horrifying, torturous, painful, anxiety-inducing, relentless, brutal situations that people find themselves in, but to me, it's not enough. Of course, Jared's moral garden is terrifying. Of course, the never-ending war is horrifying to witness. Of course, an eye growing out of your shoulder sends chills down your spine, but it feels like a quick snapshot extended out for over 20 minutes, and it just isn't scary to me. If I sit and think about the concepts and ideas and the imagery, yes, I can see how it can be scary. But as a storyteller, as a reader, what drew me into the show was the small anthology stories we get that have, like I said, a beginning, middle, and end. The nightmare domains are so chocked full of imagery and symbolism that it becomes too much of what it is, and I find myself not fully paying attention. There's no narrative in most domains, just vibes, emotions, and fears. I don't find myself caring for some victims because I don't get to really feel them out. Every statement giver, most statement givers, in the beginning of the episode in the first seasons, is able to express somewhat of who they are and their place in the world, enough to sympathize with them, to be able to sit in their shoes and live with them so we can understand who they are at a base level and witness their horror. But in Season 5, most of the people described within the domains are really only first names. Some aren't even named, with a level of separation that makes the descriptions and the telling of story not very scary to me. I understand if anyone else would have seen these episodes and been very afraid, but to me, it deviates too much from the path, and I was not as scared. Altogether, Season 5 is colored very differently for me, with different patches of quality throughout. But there's still so much good. Like I said before, most of the episodes in Season 1 through 4 are statement episodes with interspersed episodes of events and such. These statement episodes are all similarly written as first-person tellings of past moments. Some are read out by John or other employees at this institute like Martin or Tim. Others are delivered by the people who experience them like Naomi Hearn in 13 Alone and Jordan Kennedy in 55 Pest Control. Either way, they're all written the same, with some stylistic voice changes here and there. The ones I can think of are, of course, like 14 Piecemeal, 68 A Field at the Tail Hospital. They feel like different people, like fully different people. Either way, each episode feels distinct enough, but there's still purposefully stylistic differences in performance and writing. And however, this is not a problem at all, because if each episode feels like it is written by a different person, then I think it would drive people away. Johnny Sim's consistent voice and style is a good draw for many people, part of the success of the show. My boyfriend has been listening to his Magnus Archives, and he's talked about how listening to Johnny Sim's narration can get a little dull, but he enjoys listening to Gertrude Robinson. That sort of idea, like a consistent through line of who's reading the statements, who's writing the statements, makes sure that a story is successful. However, Season 5 gets a little experimental. Because of the main episodes explore different fears, Johnny Sims is a little bit more free to explore different points of view, different styles of prose, different deliveries. Some episodes are more structured than others. Some episodes feel like Johnny really having some fun. 165 Revolutions with the stranger identify issues is horror poetry. 168 Roots delivered like a doctor's report. 171 The Gardener detailed like a gardening manual. 175 Epoch like a scientific journal. 177 Wonderland as a second-person POV evil spiral Dr. David. With the hell-like nature of their world, Johnny Sims is able to explore different styles, and whether or not they may not work for you or me, it is a very fun way to make the trudge through the apocalypse not as slow. If everything was delivered the same, if everything was written like the prior statements, it would get even more dull. Back when I said I got tired with the strong central storyline, I would have gotten more tired if the episodes were stylistically the same. Some episodes in first person, third person, second person, etc. That is really good. I enjoy that a lot, and I'm very glad that he was able to do all that. This is going to be from someone who does not know how to make a podcast. So, grains of salt. From the beginning, there was a marked increase in quality, with the audio becoming more stable between episodes. There were times in Season 1 and between Season 1 through 3 where I had to keep adjusting the audio between episodes. And the background noise was very layered and diverse, making it feel even more real. The Foley work and the sound editing this season has been the best I've ever witnessed within the Magnus Archive. The soundscape is near perfect. I've noticed a decreased emphasis on background music during Season 3 and 4, with an increased emphasis on background noises around the story. Season 5 advances in leaps and bounds, from the muffled screaming of 166 Worm.
Oh, come on, John. How long does it take to describe scary mud? Oh, okay, sorry.
To the booms of 174, the Great Beast.
It doesn't matter. They are here now, and she has to save them. She cannot leave them to the growing shadow, and the thing coming ever closer.
From the hotel ambiance and the vocal distortions in 187 Checking Out.
So are you gonna knock or what?
Perhaps I was just enjoying a quiet moment before you arrived.
Yeah. Bit rude to do it on my doorstep though, isn't it?
Perhaps. My apologies.
To the growing world of fear in 200 Last Words.
Once upon a time, there was fear. Old fear. Primal fear. A fear of blood and pounding feet. A fear of that sudden burst of pain, and then nothing.
The sound is pushed to the forefront to better deliver the horror of the statements, more than any other season has, and that has just been amazing to experience. John and Martin, as a romantic couple traversing a hellscape, is as realistic as it can be. At times, I feel like Martin is a bit too hard on John, or a bit too misunderstanding than I think he should be. At times, I feel like he's being too petty or too selfish, but then I have to remind myself that the situation they're in is near unheard of. So any sort of conflict they have makes sense to me. There isn't really issues of miscommunication, but issues of trust and truth and avoidance, with John trying to shield Martin from the horrors of the world, and Martin trying to show John that he can take care of himself, and he only needs to be given the full picture of situations. Basira is probably at her most antagonistic here, being very edgy and angry throughout, but again, they're in hell. And this feels realistic. Continuing the storyline for season 4, she sees John as a monster or close to one, and she doesn't really know how to handle it because most of her life she's had to deal with monsters, mainly in violent means. So the rudeness that she has toward John is frustration and anger and fear, along with John being cagey and not sharing all the details. It makes sense. It's a horror. You're supposed to feel horrified at what's happening between the characters. Yes, it may be grating and might make Basira as a character feel too intense, but I know that the situation they're in makes their characterization explainable and realistic. Eventually, after killing Daisy, Basira mellows out, resigning to the situation, focusing on being an ally and ending the apocalypse, an ally to John, and it doesn't feel wrong for a character despite being a 180 from where she was. Melanie and George, to be the most unrealistic characters in terms of how they react in the story, but that's not a negative. Because of the setup from the characters in the past seasons, them being cut off from the fears and holding up in the tunnels feels correct in a somewhat comforting way. It's comforting to see Georgie especially be rational and still worried, and Melanie isn't as angry as before, more high-strung and also worried. When they meet up with John and Martin in 190 Scavengers and then with Basira in 198 Precipice, Melanie and Georgie are friendly, if only a bit standoffish, especially Melanie to John. But it all makes sense. I feel like they should have been more crazy, more angry, more scared, whatever. That's what's important, is that the characterization makes sense within the story. We may not like it, but at least it's written and done well. I had mentioned before in my video on season 4 that I enjoy watching the storylines wrapping up, such as Agnes Montague, the different rituals, Gertrude's murder, and then there was the still nagging Annabelle Kane storyline, and we finally got this season. I said it in my season 4 video that like all those storylines were ending, but then Annabelle Kane was still there doing stuff, and so all that was ending, and then we're gonna have this continue. We knew this was gonna continue, and here it does. The wiki describes Jonah Magnus as the main antagonist of season 5, and Annabelle being the main series antagonist. And this feels correct. Annabelle's first appearance is in episode 69, Thought for the Day, and has been appearing sporadically since then. The prevalence of the tapes and the incorrect assumption that the eye controls them is great build-up to the reveal that the web has been controlling them since the very beginning. The web having concocted the events that led up to the change, and then to escape the fears to other places, paints past events in different lights. For example, the small spider that John kills in episode 38, Lost and Found, that led to exposing Jane's worms, may as well have been the web making sure, 1, the worms don't grow in power, It's mentioned it feels like the worms were not ready for an attack in like episodes during season 1 and 2. And 2, John gets marked by the corruption. The tapes turning on by themselves, such as whenever Martin is going to deliver a statement about the extinction in season 4, is the web and Admiral Kane's doing. There are some tapes that John says were basically delivered to him wrapped in spiderweb, such as statement in 130 Meat. The use of the web lighter as well, making John start smoking again, which leads to John leaving Jurgen Leitner alone, allowing Elias to kill Leitner, delaying John from learning more, as well as Georgie taking John's lighter in 199 and seeing it through, that led to the explosion in 200 Last Words. Admiral Kane manipulating events throughout the series became an amazing revelation in this season, which helped tie many things together and deliver an excellent story. I also wanted to quickly talk about some of my favorite episodes. 167 Curiosity may be my favorite episode of season 5. I've always loved Gertrude Robinson as a character, loved her episodes, loved whenever she was narrating. I think she's a horrible person. Most of all of the episodes where Sue Sims is playing Gertrude are my favorite. Something about her delivery just hits for me. This paints Gertrude's story and her assistants, and it's very fun. Learning about Emma, Eric, Sarah, Michael, and Fiona, it all fills gaps that we didn't even know we needed. I love this episode so much. 193, The Stern Look. I very much enjoy the execution of this episode. Not the episode itself, but the execution of it, the technique of it, with John taking the role of Elias pre-Jonah, and Jonah, who's being consumed by the eye, stopping his constant flow of information to partake in the statement, taking the role of James Wright. Whenever he speaks, the voices are distorted and just sounds so cool, and it's also very intense in its delivery, and I can feel the tension throughout. The interplay between John and Jonah in playing the roles feels very intimate in a way. Because Jonah is channeling the fear of the world, to stop and participate in this feels like the world has paused for this one moment. And then when he finishes, he just goes back up and keeps filtering through. 196, This Old House, an exploration on Hilltop Road's past. We've gotten prior statements that have dealt with this house before, detailing a checkered past with it. And even now, we delve even further. The way that Martin begins reading this, sort of like a story rewriting itself again and again, trying to delve deeper into its core.
Once, there was a house. A building that, for all it might have looked like those around it, was not the same. Stop. No, it didn't start with the house. It was here long before any might have thought of it as a home. Once there was a patch of land, not quite as firm in this reality as that which surrounded it. Stop. No. It's not about the land. Mud and soil has no part in what is there. Once there was a point in space that did not quite obey all those petty rules that decide what can be allowed to happen in a world. Stop. No. It's not a point in space. The Earth spins and hurtles through the darkness, but it still carries it along. Let us simply say that once there was a place where the universe had cracked.
Learning about the past avatars and the past spheres that mark this old house is just haunting. 200 Last Words. This finale is good. It's simple. It doesn't try to be more than it should be. There is catharsis here, which is paramount in horror, with John killing Jonah, exclaiming, "This is for Sasha and Tim and Gertrude and everyone else he's hurt." And then John describes growth of the 15 fears, the avatars that courted them, the history of it all, the hunger that they felt leading them to feed from humans. It all works beautifully. The noises of gears turning while the web is making its plan are beautiful and terrifying all the same. And then Martin and John's interaction, their love and anger for each other, the explosion and the horrible decision they have to do. Just stunning. And finally, Basira, Melanie, and Georgie finding a tape buried in rubble, and the world back to normal, is such a great send-off, with Basira saying, "Good luck to us, the listeners," that casts us, the listeners, as the victims or something akin to that. It's just so smart. Not knowing what truly happened with John and Martin, something we all expected to be answered in Magnus Protocol, to be honest, is a great setup for the future of the story. And sort of like what I mentioned in my kill count videos, getting to hear that Simon Fairchild was killed by a mob of angry people really feels right in my heart. In conclusion, I think that Season 5 of the Magnus Archives is an unbalanced, rigid story with compelling and satisfying character arcs and grand revelations with incredible production and execution despite large obstacles in their way. Personally, some horror aspects are missing, but they may be present for others as horror is subjective. Overall, this is my least favorite season, but not because it was written badly by any means. On the contrary, I think the best writing has occurred in the season, but it simply does not hit the level that I wanted, and it feels too foreign and different to the story that preceded. I wanted to explore my feelings for the season, to explain and stretch it out and make it make sense to me, and I hope that this is illuminating to some of you, and if you disagree with me, please let me know. I would love to hear what worked or didn't work for you all, and your highlights for the season. What episodes did you like? What episodes did you have intense fear with, and everything like that. I plan to be making a ranking video for the 40 episodes in Season 5, like I did with Season 4, so keep an eye out for that, and have a handful of other things I want to plan as well. And once Magnus Protocol comes out, you know I'm also going to be talking about that too. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all that jazz. And if you see a spider, treat it nicely. Thank you.